A civic movement grounded in the Constitution. Patriotism explained. Not right, not left, but straight ahead.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Patriot Party, where truth, transparency, and constitutional principles come before politics. The Patriot Party movement is focused on re-empowering we the people, restoring accountability, and putting America first through honest conversations and real solutions. America first, not America only, because we lead by example. Today we're joined by Tom Teicher, an America 250 commentator, civic futurist, constitutional thought leader, attorney, and public policy advocate, who is helping lead an important conversation about America's constitutional future. As our nation celebrates its 250th anniversary, Tom has proposed a thought-provoking idea, a structured constitutional review process through a proposed 28th Amendment designed to preserve the Constitution's core principles while allowing each generation to thoughtfully examine the challenges of its time. Today we'll explore constitutional stewardship, civic education, whether our current system is prepared for the next 250 years, and how Americans can strengthen our republic while remaining grounded in the Constitution. Tom, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Matt. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we'll get right started. I got us a good interview. So your proposal for a structured constitutional convention every 40 years, it immediately caught my attention because I've often said that every generation has a responsibility to steward, not simply inherit the Constitution. What inspired this idea, and how would it work without threatening the Constitution's foundational principles?
Well, let me take a step back and provide the context here. When the founders wrote the Constitution, they knew it was an imperfect document. And they also knew that over time, they would find out how well the governing framework worked and whether changes needed to be made. And they also realized that, life changes, circumstances changes, possibilities change. Sometimes our values change. And so the Constitution needs to have a way of being able to be amended, to be modified. And so they put in place Article 5. And Article 5 provides two ways of amending the Constitution. But only one of them has been used. So here's the way this works. One of them is initiated by Congress, requires 2/3 vote by both the House and the Senate, and then ratification by 3/4 of the states. That's a pretty high bar, but fair enough. It shouldn't be easy to amend the Constitution. It should be a permanent document, not a fluid document. And so since the original ratification of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, which were basically an extension of that, there have only been 17 amendments. Well, why is that? And I think the problem we're up against is that the first method, initiated by Congress, has a very high bar. And the second method, which has great potential, is unusable. The second method is a constitutional convention, which would be initiated by the states. So a constitutional convention has great potential. First of all, it provides a way of amending the Constitution that isn't dependent on Congress initiating it. Because clearly there could be some things that Congress wouldn't touch just because they have a vested interest in their own prerogatives and the like.
Term limits.
Term limits is a good example, absolutely. But then beyond that, if you call for a constitutional convention, there are all kinds of possibilities in terms of looking at the Constitution as a whole, looking at it as a coherent document, being able to address any number of issues. The problem is that the provision in Article 5 that allows for a convention doesn't provide any guidance, doesn't provide any details. It doesn't let you know, well, if this was initiated because of the impetus to address a particular issue, can the convention address other issues? It doesn't tell you one way or the other. It doesn't tell you how delegates are selected. It doesn't tell you the rules of the game. And as a result, it's always been considered too hot to handle, and we've never had a constitutional convention. The value of this, I look at much in the way, the analogy I use is to how we do life. We use mid-course corrections as part of the way we do life. Sometimes as a person, as an individual, we do some personal soul searching. Sometimes as an organization, you'll have a corporation go on a weekend retreat. But it's a very normal way to take a step back once in a while and see how are we doing and what modifications might we make. And so the idea of having a constitutional convention on a regular basis, and I didn't do it, just to be precise about it, based on the generational idea. That was certainly something that Thomas Jefferson pitched for. He certainly believed in the idea of redoing the Constitution, as he said, every 19 years. I said it further out to every 40 years because I think there's a balance between that sort of sense of permanence that the Constitution requires, that the second that you complete one convention, that you're not immediately looking at how you can tweak things for the next convention. There needs to be some space in between, but also you need time to see how the changes that have been produced, how they are working. The fact is, a convention will be, even if it's a good idea, it will be disruptive. It will operate over any number of months parallel to the regular normal course of business. So I set that at 40 years. And then the proposed amendment then lays out a set of details in how that would be organized, and you can tell me whether you want me to start to go into detail about that.
Maybe in a minute. I want to. I mean, you are speaking my language here, because I have been saying on shows and everything. I said at some point we need to call a state constitution convention. That's before I even heard about your amendment. At some point we need to figure out how to call one. We need to call one, and we need to define Article 5 so there is a structure to be able to call it in the future as one of the things, because, I mean, I believe in a hybrid. Some people believe in originalists, some people believe in living. We teach both in the curriculum because they're so widespread. I believe in structured life. I mean, if it doesn't grow, it dies, but there needs to be structure. So, like, defining Article 5 would be that structure, or your amendment would be that structured life. And that's what I believe. I love what you're talking about with the amendment, and it goes right along. You're talking about how it evolves and how society evolves. With our curriculum, the curriculum evolves as society evolves and as kids learn differently because their values change.
Right, and society changes, and you need to be able to adapt, and that's just sort of the nature of things. So if there is a mechanism in place which mandates it, I wouldn't make it discretionary. I would just sort of lock it in that every 40 years there is a constitutional convention. It is organized in a particular way, and before diving too much into detail, I think an important principle should be laid out, which is that the details of how the convention is organized and how it operates is based on the premise that it has to be a totally impartial process, a totally neutral process. It should not make any difference which political party has the upper hand at the time the convention is held. And it should try to really minimize the opportunity for those with the inside track to be able to put their thumb on the scale. So, for example, it would make any current public official ineligible to be a delegate. So it's got to be as impartial. It's got to be a kind of process where, regardless of whether you lean left or whether you lean right, you say to yourself, this process seems fair, it seems sensible, and even though I don't know what the outcomes will be, I can stand behind it because I believe the process is a workable one and a fair one.
Well, I mean, the document starts with "we the people," not "we the parties." So, absolutely, this is the people's document. I think we've lost sight of that. Actually, my next question kind of goes into a little bit more detail about what you got going on. So, one concern many Americans have whenever they hear constitutional convention is that it could become a runaway convention. What safeguards would you build into your proposal to protect the Constitution while still allowing meaningful modernization?
So, there's an expression that's used once in a while in various contexts, which is trust the process. And, that may not be very satisfying to a lot of people. But this is premised on the idea that if the process is a good one, the outcomes will be good. Let me give you a little analogy. It's not quite on point, but it's close enough to it to kind of make the point. I live in Seattle, and we have a fine professional football team called the Seahawks, who won the Super Bowl last year, and the coach Mike McDonald has used the phrase a number of times where when he is questioned about things, for example, in the off-season, a lot of reporters would say, look, the Los Angeles Rams improved their team by adding X, Y, and Z players and the like. How are you going to deal with all that? And McDonald's comment has always been, we don't care. And the notion behind it is we have a way of doing our business. We are going to stick to our plan. We have a process. The process has served us well in the past. We believe the process will serve us well in the future. So as you and I talk about the details of this thing, while, it might look like it's sort of an act of faith to say that there will be no guarantees as to how narrow or how expansive the agenda is.
Okay.
And what the outcomes might be, because the process is a reasonable one, and when we get into it, I think there's a persuasive case that it's one. I think the concern about a runaway convention really diminishes.
Well, the only thing I would say about that, which I don't even think, I think you kind of cover it with what you say, is, one thing about this movement is if I had to just sum it up in one word, I'd say transparency. So as long as we can see the process, we'll trust it. But don't ask us to trust it, on blindly, because I think part of the problem is we've trusted the process for so long we haven't been able to see it.
Right. Well, it's transparency as far as you can take transparency. I mean, certainly one of the elements of this proposal, which is totally consistent with how the Founding Fathers wrote the Constitution back in 1787, is that it would be their judgment call as to whether to hold their sessions in private or to make them accessible to the public and the media. In my view, making it private is the right way to go because they don't have to play to another audience and the delegates can be themselves. Some people may be uneasy about that. I think an important part of this is to understand how the delegates are chosen. And if you don't mind, if I could get into that a little bit, I think it's the kind of detail that would put people a little bit more at ease about trusting the process and trusting the delegates. Is it okay if I just sort of describe that process?
Yeah. Go get into that detail a little bit, and then we'll spin back into the questions I got. Go ahead.
Okay. So this concept of impartiality is really, really critical. It has to be a trustworthy process that people can really stand behind. So the premise is this, that each state would get 3 delegates. And we have 50 states. I would also add Washington, D.C. into the mix, time to give them a break. So it's the equivalent of 51 states. And you would have 3 delegates per state, which is a total of 153 delegates, which is certainly an ample number. The Founding Fathers only had 55 at that convention. Now, how are those delegates chosen? The way it would work is that with all states except for the state of Nebraska and the Washington, D.C. Council, you have a bicameral legislature. You have a House and a Senate, or there'll be some other name to it. But basically, you have two chambers of the legislature. In this case, let's take my own state, Washington State. So we have a House and a Senate. The House would choose one delegate. The Senate would choose one delegate. Now, how would they choose their delegates? The way they would choose their delegates is that, say, the House will have to approve somebody with an 80% supermajority. That is a very, very, very high bar. Now, what is important about using a supermajority like 80%? What that means is that for somebody to be approved as a delegate to represent our state, they're going to have to be somebody who is well regarded and respected across the political spectrum, because no party has such a majority to that extent. And when you look at the 51 equivalent states, a very high percentage, roughly 3/4 of the states, do not have legislatures which have 3/4 with one party or another. So you have an overwhelming percentage of states that will have to choose delegates that reflect the entire state, that are respected by both ends of the political spectrum. And then once you have those two delegates then get to choose the third delegate, which again clearly would have to meet that first standard in terms of being sort of philosophically compatible. But it would allow them to bring in another perspective or a set of skills. And so that would be your three delegates of the state. So since the composition of the delegations is overwhelmingly skewed towards delegations that represent the entirety of the state, that that are people who are respected across the political spectrum, the concern that there's going to be a particular point of view that is just going to go hog wild is basically eliminated.
You know, the structure actually reminds me a little bit. I didn't start out with the idea to make this federal policy producer. It actually started out, I wanted to write some legislation for a constitutional quality control board. I didn't know anything about writing legislation, so I started researching and training AI. It's a lot easier to do something on your phone with AI than it is to give it to the people. So I trained my AI. I got the legislation for a constitutional quality control board. It kind of sets up the same way, but except for it's got two from each state. But it kind of sets up a similar way. So I spit that out. Then we had a guest on for Fixing America, and he's supposed to come on and theoretically tell us how to fix something. Well, he had research for years, the data points and everything, to fix the healthcare system. So we plugged it into to my program, and it popped out, you know, like a 10-page bill. It's on the prototype page for the Patriot Party website. And we did the stress test. It was going to save the American people $2 trillion a year. There's nothing like it. It's using HSA accounts and everything. And so it's being passed around in D.C. And I'm like, oh, the people need this. And that's where the idea came from. So actually, my first prototype software, it kind of breaks down a little bit like what you're talking about right now. It doesn't do the 3. I kind of like the way that you did the 3. It only does 2, though.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, again, by incorporating the AI, it provides a very quick and probably pretty high quality sort of draft that reflects the content that you want in the legislation. I mean, I think we know enough about AI to know that it's got its own imperfections, but if it takes you 95% down the road and provides a prototype, a template for what you want to do,
a constitutionally sound template,
then it can take you a long way. I mean, one of the things I find that's interesting and useful about the AI piece is that you can draft something. You can ask AI to say put it through your system or one of the other AI programs, and ask them to translate it into a usable document. What I actually find most interesting is that they all have, including yours, a little bit of commentary at the end, which raises some questions about, are you sure that you haven't thought about so-and-so? Or, so-and-so might be a complication that you might want to look into. The concerns may or may not have validity, but they normally, some of them will. And it's good to get some pushback to say, there may be some things here that need to be tweaked a little bit.
Well, and we intentionally made the version 1 very simple. We put intelligence in it to give like a constitutional risk score, to the feasibility of implementing it just to start learning. We have some wonderful intelligence plan for it, architected like historical policy analysis, where it'll learn off of all the mistakes. And it'll basically be able to use hindsight as 2020 when it's building bills. And right now it's just doing federal, but we've got something architected where it's going to be able to do state, local ordinances, and everything in the future. Our biggest thing was figuring out how to get the computation costs down so we could scale it for the people. Because we were thinking when we first started this project that it was going to cost about 3 to 5 cents a generation on our end for computation to provide this technology. Well, we learn from people's mistakes, and we've architected intelligence modules. So instead of reinventing the wheel every time, what we know, the canonical point, is not having to reinvent every time. It's got a structured input, a structured output. So we've been able to get the cost down for each generation on this pilot program to 1/15 of a cent. That is literally $667 for 1 million generations, which normally would have cost people in policy, if they knew the right people, $10,000 or $20,000. That's tens of billions that we're saving per million generations for the American people. I'm excited about it, really.
Well, it's anything that sort of simplifies the process, and with all due respect to my brothers and sisters with legal backgrounds, to not have to make those additional investments, or to reduce them, to be able to convert something into at least a good first draft that's workable. I think it's terrific.
I think it'll allow them, I don't think it autonomizes them, I think it allows them to take on more, and it clears out a lot of congestion is what it does, if it's implemented properly and responsibly.
I mean, things take time, and thought takes time. But as you suggested earlier, a lot depends on what you put into it to begin with. I actually tried a little experiment with your system, where I asked it to produce a draft based on the idea of a mandatory constitutional convention every 40 years. And it churned it out. And then what was interesting, though, is that it can only work with what's provided. And so it raises questions as to, actually it didn't raise the question, it presumed that delegates would just simply be selected by the state legislatures as the state legislatures choose to do it, which is the way it's been done in the past. Of course, I'm trying to offer something with a little variation on that theme. My point simply being that what you produce here, in a sense, is only as good as the input, in a way.
Yes, that's why we create, and the more, it's meant to be simple so, a sixth grader can put in veterans and get some legislation. But I had, on a test case, I had a friend who was a veteran who wanted to open up a nonprofit to do all this stuff for veterans that was lacking in his experience. I said, well, give me some paragraphs on what you want your nonprofit to do. We put that in the prompt box, and it spit out 10 pages of custom legislation around everything that he wanted. I mean, so that's where I'm telling people, play with it, try to break it. I'm pretty sure we've done some short letters. You can write a letter to your congressperson or your representative about what's wrong, and it'll extract that and make legislation off of it. But it's meant to be, like I said, it's meant as a learning tool. And this is just V1. We've got some wonderful stuff, but we had to get the computation cost, and we've got to get the users and all that kind of stuff. And like you said, it takes time. I mean, remember when the internet first came out? People didn't want to shop on Amazon. They wanted to go to the mall. Now nobody goes to the mall. They want to shop on Amazon. All right. Well, this next question we kind of touched down on it a little bit, but America is entering an era shaped by artificial intelligence, digital communication, and technologies the founders could never have imagined. How do we preserve timeless constitutional principles while responsibly adapting to an entirely new technological landscape?
Well, the first thing I would say is this. Once the delegates meet in this convention, I mean, it'll be their judgment as to how they want to do their business. The first recommendation I would make, and I presume these are really, really smart people, and they will probably go about it something along these lines, would be first, try to identify what is working well, what they want to make sure is left untouched. Even though the Constitution has plenty of imperfections, of course it depends on one's point of view, but one of the things I think not to take for granted is the fact that even though it was loaded with compromises in order to get through and to get this country started, it has worked remarkably well for almost 240 years now, and that should not be minimized. So the first order of business is, presumably to ask the question, what should we just not tamper with at all? Now, the other end of the question about technology itself, it's interesting. They'll have their judgment calls as to what they want to do and how they want to go about it. Technology clearly changes quickly. And there are other things in life that are changing in ways that we have concerns about it being out of control, like climate change, for example. Perhaps, and I don't know what they can come up with, perhaps they can develop a mechanism in the Constitution that will provide a means for being able to deal with long-run concerns as well as short-run concerns. You don't know what the future is going to be like. Technology changes every day. There's the climate. There are other things. And, much like life itself, you want to deal with your short-term pressures, but you also want to plan for a future. And so I think based on an understanding that they will not be able to foresee what technology is going to look like and how you want to, on the one hand, make use of its strengths, on the other hand, be able to deal with its possible shortcomings or even dangers that it might present, that perhaps they may create some structures or procedures that enable us to look into the future and be able to address these things as they are developing. It depends on their creativity, and that again strengthens the case, in my view, for not going into this with a predetermined agenda. Let the delegates figure that out. Trust their judgment.
I love this grounded approach because it literally verbatim is like what we have on our graphics and social media. The way you say keep what works, and then we always say learn from what didn't, and correct course, and keep what works. But I think a big problem a lot of times, not in the Constitutional Convention because that would be every 40 years, but I think, at least personally, this is my opinion, if you look back on certain issues, a lot of times they don't keep what works, they just don't keep anything and start, and then that's why the pendulum usually swings from one side to the other and doesn't meet in the middle.
Well, I think that's an interesting point. We sometimes will
overcorrect.
Try to overcorrect and try to reinvent the wheel, all over again. We have just something that is happening locally, and again, just because you've raised an interesting point here, I'm going to try to use an analogy that I think kind of reinforces your point, which is that we, in the Seattle-King County area, we have a serious homelessness problem. And so a few years ago, the local municipalities developed a regional authority as a way of creating some efficiencies and being able to deal with the fact that each city in the immediate area was playing by its own rules and establishing its own guidelines and trying to figure out what kind of temporary housing for homeless people, what kind of permanent housing, what kind of shelters, what kind of eligibility rules should be established. And they're all playing by their own rules. So what the municipal leaders did, which was something quite sensible, was they created a regional authority so there could be some coordination and a common set of rules and regulations and all that. Well, so what happened? What happened was that it got off to a very, very messy start, particularly with a lot of money being wasted, a lot of administrative problems, and what I think, this is my own view, what might have made things work a lot better was that rather than creating a whole new administrative entity, this regional authority, that perhaps they could have built on an existing regional system like our regional transportation system, which already has an administrative mechanism in place. So why not make use of it? So I think it's just trying to reinforce your point.
Absolutely, and I can almost kind of give a little bit of an analogy on how this actually messes AI up too. So, have you ever heard of AI drifting or having hallucinations?
Yes.
So it does. I mean, they're having a problem with it because it'll just spit out stuff you don't know where it came from. And one of those big problems we think is because when you have an agent, the agent is constantly computating and reinventing the wheel, and that's why we hard programmed into intelligence modules with one output, one input, instead of having an agent, which would cost more too, and they reinvent the wheel every time, and when they reinvent the wheel every time, even the AI hallucinates and drifts. So obviously humans will if they reinvent the wheel every time.
Yeah, and you know, like anything else in life, why throw away something that has worked well or that has evolved in a way that is working well? It's
Well, one of my country sayings is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, you know?
right, absolutely.
Okay, so you've emphasized constitutional stewardship rather than constitutional replacement. What does stewardship mean to you, and what responsibility does every generation have in preparing America for the next 250 years?
I'm not going to use the word stewardship because it's not my word.
Okay.
When this podcast was set up, the folks who contacted you used the word stewardship. It's not a word that I think is particularly helpful. So we'll scrap that.
Okay, you might want to get that fixed on your page. Your little PDF.
right. Well, that's a work in progress. We'll see. I'm sorry. Could you repeat the back end of the question?
Okay. When I say stewardship, put whatever word you believe in place of it. Okay. You've emphasized constitutional stewardship rather than constitutional replacement. What does stewardship mean to you, and what responsibility does every generation have in preparing America for the next 250 years?
All right. So, again, just setting aside the technicality about my using 40 years rather than generation and scrapping the stewardship thing. I am not, when I say trust the process, I really mean trust the process and don't shackle the delegates. And part of what that means is that if they want to look at the Constitution and decide to address only one issue, and one issue only, and that they make an adjustment in that. And ultimately, it'll either be thumbs up or thumbs down by the people, because my ratification process involves a popular vote by the American people. But if they want to address just one issue, make one minor change, and call it a day, they can do that. If they want to do an overhaul of a significant part of the Constitution, they can they can do that as well. So let's talk about a couple of examples. Let's say, in terms of a one issue kind of thing, at the risk of annoying people on one end of the spectrum or another, they could decide, all we want to do is decide whether or not to have an equal rights amendment. All right, that's likely to interest people maybe at one end of the spectrum. Let's say that's not their agenda. Let's say we're only going to discuss one issue. We want to take a look at birthright citizenship and decide whether that's a good idea or not, and if so, let's make sure that it's totally clear or reinforced in some way. They can do that. They can also look at an issue that is designed to provide some clarity. I'm off on a little bit of a tangent here. The Second Amendment is a perfect example of this. God knows what those words mean, and everybody's got their own interpretation. But, a question might be, well, is there a way to establish a right to bear arms while at the same time being able to protect public safety? Well, they can tackle an issue like that, maybe successfully, may not, but that'll be up to them. All right, so they could, if they want to, they can just choose a single issue. On the other hand, they can choose a whole myriad of issues, and they can even include issues that aren't even on the part of the Constitution. Here's an example. Let's say they come to a conclusion that, we might be better off with a multi-party system, okay? Because the two-party system, for a variety of reasons, does not seem to be getting us where we want to get to these days. All right, let's say they make that judgment, whether you agree with it or not. So let's say they make that judgment and think we want to have a multi-party system. Well, if you have a multi-party system, there may not be any provision in the Constitution that indicates there'll be a multi-party system, just like there's nothing in the Constitution that indicates it's a two-party system. But if you have a multi-party system, the only way to get there is to change the way people are elected. Congressional districts deal with the gerrymandering issue, et cetera, et cetera. You would change a number of the elements involved in electing our public officials. So they could create new issues. They have a wide, they can do whatever they want. I guess
it's funny that you mentioned this. I'd be interested if you ever get a chance to go look at our prototype page. We had like 9 proofs of concept. One of them was how to address gun violence without violating the Second Amendment. We came out with legislation for it. I'd love your take on it to see if you think. We had a constitutional lawyer look it over. He said it was constitutional. I'd love your take on it. We also came up with another one that addresses how to create legislation for term limits. Now, we think it'll survive Supreme Court challenges. It's not really term limits. It's called civic reintegration. And since the states run the ballots, they, after so many years, you have to look at the legislation. I don't remember how it did for the House and the Senate. But after so many, then they can't be put on the state ballot. Now, people can write their name in. That way it doesn't disenfranchise voters. But when they're writing it, they're knowing, okay, this is kind of going against constitutional lifetime appointment thing. And and what it does is they have to go cycle out. Live back with the people for a term, and then they can rerun again. But I just don't think people were ever, when Washington went, he made it better, he went back to the farm. Nobody wants to go back to the farm anymore.
Well, on the issue of term limits, I think that's an example of if something like that, let's say congressional term limits, if that's put in the Constitution, then that's the law of the land. That'll supersede what else was there. And another part of this is that I am, I've got my biases just like the next guy. And there may be things I am rooting for that if there's a convention, I'm going to hope that they address X, Y, and Z issues. I'm going to hope that they address them in a way that's consistent with my own preferences and biases. I won't have any control over that. So an important part of this is to understand that there aren't any predetermined agenda items or predetermined outcomes. So, I, no different than any other system, will be putting my faith this ever became a constitutional amendment, my faith in the process. And I expect that nobody is going to be totally satisfied with everything that comes out of it. But I do think an important byproduct, and I can't guarantee this, but I think an important byproduct of this is that both the process of the conversation around whether we should have this 28th Amendment, and if this 28th Amendment did become law, the process of public review of the proposed amendments before the ratification process started, much in line with the Federalist Papers, you might recall from school days, where, which laid out the arguments in favor of the changes. I think the process of engaging the public in a process that will ultimately sort of revitalize, renew, reset the foundation of our democracy might be a way of maybe lowering our voices a little bit, helping to promote a little better civic discourse, help to unify us a little bit. I can't guarantee that, but if we're all involved in this same process, and the vast majority of Americans feel that, on balance, this new Constitution, this amended Constitution, is something that I can buy off on. Hopefully, it'll help make the country less divisive than it has been in recent years. I hope.
I definitely think it's one part. We always say an informed citizenry is the ultimate checks and balances. I think it's one part, but I think there are several other parts that are going to go in with something radical like that. Like, we all have to start working from the same set of facts. We can't have one group saying 10 million people are coming across the border, another group saying nobody's coming across the border. We're living in two different realities. We can't even have a conversation. And that is why we're building the Truth Matters newsroom, where what we know, what we don't know, independently verified, no partisan, no rumor mill, because we have to start working for the same set of facts. Another thing is, we have monetized madness into society. If you look at social media, if you look at the systems that society uses all the time, we're paid, independent creators, news channels, they're paid for outrage. So we have monetized madness because that's where money's at. So people are going to do what they're paid to do. So we have to change the way that what we pay for. Okay, well, we need a base level for viral content, but then we need a multiplier for stuff of substance. So we start, reinventing critical thinking back, reintroducing it into society, because all the good stuff we do is not going to mean a hill of beans if nobody gets involved and thinks about it.
Well, I think that, since part of your work involves the civics curriculum and the like, and I think for people to participate in democracy, they have to be prepared to. And just going to the voting booth and not having a clue as what's there is not doing anybody any favors. And so I think people need to be able to become acquainted with their history, and as objectively as that can be, different points of view regarding the elements of the history, understand our system of government, you talk about social media. I think it's really important that schools be able to teach kids how to see through the BS of social media.
We have media literacy in our curriculum. We're teaching media literacy in the curriculum. It's part of it.
Yeah, people have to develop analytical skills, and they have to develop a strong enough sense of skepticism so they can say, look, when I'm seeing so-and-so, I may want to see whether this is verified from some other sources and the like. So I think citizens, we tend to put all our efforts on our leadership and all that, and that's obviously a very big part of it. And the quality of our systems, and that's a very big part of it. But, two other elements to this, to me, are the citizens and the media. And they have their responsibilities to make all this work.
Absolutely, and the parent company, Civic Truth, we always say we're bridging the gap between us and our elected officials, and bridging the gap between us and technology, because for so long, the better technology got, the more complicated it got. I mean, for me to do this movement, I've had to use technology over half the time to figure out how to use other technology. And that, we've lost sight of things. That we're serving technology. Technology isn't serving us at that point. So what we're trying to do is, with new technology, we can make it a simple input, sophisticated output. We do the sophisticated engineering on the back end. You have the simple stuff without endless menus where you can just kind of just tell what you want and it takes you through it. And we believe that that can help, not only help during the voting process, possibly like explaining different issues, but we have some stuff developed that we think can help secure the voting system even better.
Well, you know, I think that there are plenty of questions out there, and I think that it's important that there, you know, be people like yourself who are trying to innovate and trying to make the system, you know, work better, you know, without necessarily pushing a particular agenda. I mean, there's nothing wrong with people who want to do that, but
No.
I think improving our systems, improving our abilities of citizens to participate in thoughtful ways, I think is really important.
Constructively, and I think, you know, a lot of people, they fuss about politicians, and I'm like, yeah, they could do better, they're human, but we can do better too. And I think being able to bridge the gap eventually so the politicians can know in real time what their constituents want, and if they don't vote that way, then they got to explain to their constituents why they didn't vote that way. You know, I believe that with modern technology, we can make almost everything that needs to be transparent. Obviously, some national security stuff doesn't need to be transparent, but everything that does need to be, I think that we can shine a light on that stuff with modern technology.
Well, I think you know, transparency is really important. The communication between elected officials and their constituents is really important, and that includes elected officials, frankly, having the guts to sometimes offer ideas that may be counter to what conventional thinking might be. You know, there's upsetting the apple cart can sometimes do us all a favor. But the important thing is that these things be done in a thoughtful way, and if leaders have the guts to offer something that's different, to at least explain themselves. And for the citizens to be willing to think hard about these things, not just grab a headline and look at it in simplistic terms.
I mean, isn't that what the American experiment was started with? People that were willing to think outside the box?
Well, absolutely, absolutely. You know, and they realized, you know, let's recall that the Articles of Confederation wasn't working. Now, you can either decide at that point and say, well, you know, this American experiment, it fails. Nice try, have a nice day, and we have 13 different countries. Or you can decide, well, I guess we better go back to the drawing board here, and I'm, you know, lucky for all of us, that's what they did.
Yeah, and you know, I love it. It's so timely. America 250. Let's not think about this. I mean, let's see what we did right and what we did wrong, and let's think about how we're gonna, you know, make it better the next 250 years.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you this: if every American watched this conversation and remember just one principle about preserving our republic for future generations, what would you want that principle to be?
Well, you know, the underlying notion behind this 28th Amendment, behind this regular Constitutional Convention proposal, is that not only does there need to be and we haven't discussed it in all its details, but let's just sort of go with this in general. Not only does there have to be a reason that is sound for doing it, which is based simply on the need to keep up with the times, make changes as needed, and all that. But it's doing it in a way that is worthy of our trust. If the process that I am proposing in this amendment was something that in any way skewed left or right, then in my view it should be dead in the water. This has to be something where we're saying that no matter where you sit, no matter what your perspective is, you're saying to yourself, look, I'm an American, and I think there's a process that's going to be in place that is going to improve our democracy in ways that are sensible, that are fair. And while I may not support every particular detail that comes out of this process, that on balance, since the process itself is trustworthy, I'm willing to invest my energy and my sentiments and emotions in favor of this.
I love it. I love it. I mean, it's for we the people. I love it. Tom, if you'll just hang around for a minute, let me close this up, and then we can talk for a few minutes afterwards.
Sounds good.
Tom, thank you for joining us today. Whether people agree with every proposal or not, conversations like this remind us that constitutional stewardship requires thoughtful discussion, civic education, and citizens who are willing to think beyond today's headlines and consider the long-term future of our republic. That's exactly the kind of dialogue we hope to encourage here at the Patriot Party. And to everyone watching and listening, remember, truth isn't partisan, it's patriotic.